Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the latest IFA webinar. Delighted to be joined this morning, UK time and evening Australian time, by David McCready. David, thank you for joining us. I know your time and your days at present are extremely busy, so we're very grateful for you joining us. Before I formally introduce David, can I just run, as always, through a couple of housekeeping points? Hopefully we won't have any technology issues, but if we do, please bear with us. We will look to resolve those as efficiently and as quickly as possible. If you are having a sound or a visual issue, can I ask you maybe to check your internet, your connectivity first? We've found over the last 2 years, since doing a lot of webinars online, that it's actually your end where the problem might lie, but please check that first. If not, if there's a problem, do let me know through either the chat and the Q&A buttons. I mentioned the chat and the Q&A buttons. They're important because they bring these sessions to life. This is where we ask questions. This is where we share experiences, observations, queries, questions. With this being a Zoom webinar, it's not a verbal way of communicating, it's a written way. So please use the Q&A and the chat facility. I will monitor that so David doesn't have to, as he's speaking over the next 20, 30 minutes, but please use that. We will share David's slides with everybody over the next 24, 48 hours, and the session, for everybody who asks me, is being recorded. So hopefully from a housekeeping perspective, we're good. Let me introduce David. David McCready has led the Australian British Chamber of Commerce for more than a decade. During his tenure, the Chamber has grown significantly, expanding operations across 5 states and the ACT, as well as leading the Catalyst programme in the UK for the first time in the Chamber's history. David is a trusted advisor, an expert on the Australian-British relationship across economic and political landscapes. David was a key advisor in the development of the Australian-UK FTA, Free Trade Agreement, which was signed back in December 2021. David, I will put myself on mute, but I will have my camera on. As I say, I will deal with any queries, questions as they come through, but thank you for joining us this evening, your time, and I'll hand over to you, but welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and welcome everybody. It's fantastic to be able to speak to you. I'm currently sitting in my office in downtown Sydney. That's not a window, unfortunately, to the outside over my shoulder, which I often get asked. It's a painting of Sydney Harbour during the International Fleet Review about 2013, I think it was, a while ago now. But it's terrific to join you, and it's terrific to have the opportunity to share with you the great opportunities that do exist in Australia and to unpack some of the things that you need to think about. I was saying to Jonathan earlier, I was tossing and turning a bit over the weekend about how I was actually going to nail this presentation and what was going to be the framework that I used. And what I've decided is, whilst I understand some of you may be firms that are looking to come to the UK yourselves, others of you may be advisors and financial advisors and so forth, advising firms that might be looking at coming to Australia. I'm going to treat you all, for the sake of this presentation, as people who yourselves might be coming to Australia. And I look forward to answering lots of questions, giving my opinions and advice at the back end of hopefully what will be about 20-25 minutes of presentation. So I hope not to bore you to death too much with PowerPoint, and really look forward to a really fruitful conversation at the back end. So as I've been introduced, I'm the CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. I've been doing this role since 2010, so I've been around a long time, and I was very heavily involved in the negotiations between Australia and the UK for the Free Trade Agreement. So I've got quite a lot of insights to share, But I also want to talk about some of the practicalities of UK firms. What do they need to think about when they're coming to Australia? And if I can figure out how to get my slides to progress, there we are. So I thought I might give you a starting point about, well, where are we now? What's happening in Australia at the moment? And, I follow the UK pretty closely. I'm watching your energy crisis, trouble with the Northern Ireland issue. Where are you at? You're a lot further down the post-COVID path than we are here in Australia, but we're watching that with interest. But we're seeing some great economic headwinds too, with rising inflation. But with rising inflation, with economic headwinds, always comes opportunity. And I think this is a great opportunity in the Australia-UK relationship right at this very moment, to think about what can we do together that we perhaps haven't done as much of before or weren't doing before, and what could that look like in the future. And a free trade agreement helps to mainly highlight first and foremost the opportunities in this market, but then also to unpack and when you unpack that, what does that actually mean? Well, there's a lot of things that actually then distributes down into in terms of the detail of the FTA, which is really useful and can be utilised by UK businesses looking to invest or to export and trade with Australia. So I'll leave I won't try and be an economist and give you the whole nuts and bolts, other than to say our unemployment rate's about 3.9%. The minimum wage in Australia, it got announced today, will be rising by 5.2%, which basically means $1 an hour for the lowest paid workers in Australia. But apart from that, why Australia? Why does Australia appeal as a market? Well, for starters, we've got a lot of similarities. We share the same language. Well, kind of. If you can understand me, you're doing well. There's certainly parts of the UK which it's a little bit harder to understand than others. Rule of law is fundamental of our society, and the Westminster parliamentary system. We share the Queen as head of state. We've very much enjoyed the Queen's Jubilee celebrations from afar here, but also done our own. And we have similar structures for a whole range of things. If you think of financial regulation, your FCA is our ASIC, the Australian Security Investment Commission. We've got APRA, you've got the PRA, you've got the Bank of England, we've got the Reserve Bank of Australia. All of those structures are very much based on a similar framework. We have similar tax and company structures. We have an educated workforce. There are lots of reasons why societally we are very much the same, but we're not exactly the same. We're at the other end of the world. We have a time zone that has a compatibility more with the Asian region than the sort of East meets West or West meets East conversation that you might have in the UK time zone. That's really advantageous for a lot of organisations looking to grow in the Asian region. And we have an enormous number of free trade agreements in Australia with some of the biggest markets, growing markets of the world, with China, South Korea, Japan. I've noticed I've got a typo there. It's the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the UK is looking to join. And in fact, there's a negotiation for that in Sydney in a couple of weeks. We have a free trade agreement with the US, with Peru, Chile, New Zealand, Singapore, and there are others. And soon to be with the UK. Now, we have a signed agreement, we just haven't got it ratified yet. So I make this statement about where we're up to on the FTA. It's been signed. It needs to go through a parliamentary ratification process. That process is basically starting now in the UK. You would have seen, if you're following this part of the world, the Trade and Agriculture Commission reporting, DIT's report to that commission came in last week and gave a 3 big ticks to move to that process on. We've had one of those wonderful democratic processes here with a general election on the 21st of May. So we're a little bit slower on that. We'd started the process, then we had an election. Now we've got to fundamentally restart the process effectively. But we were really pleased to see that the Australian Trade Minister and the Secretary of State for Trade, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Don Russell, who's our Trade Minister, met in the sidelines of the WTO meeting just a couple of, well, I think it was yesterday actually. So there's good progress and a good opportunity for that to come to fruition in the second half of this year. Certainly, I'd imagine it would be in force and ready for people to use by the end of the year. So what else can I tell you about Australia? Well, our demographics are very similar to the UK. We have an aging population due to the baby boom era after World War II. We have a wealthy society, including having the 4th largest pension pool, we call it superannuation, in the world. And a lot of our investment is actually coming to the UK. If you look at things like, for example, the massive urban regeneration project just between King's Cross and St Pancras, 72% owned by one of the Australian superannuation funds. We also help own water assets and toll roads and other airports and other assets in the UK. But there's also about 1.2 million Brits out of 25 million Australians. So there's a good British market to attack here. But like the UK, we're also immensely multicultural. There's about 1.4 million ethnic Chinese or people of Chinese descent in Australia. There are many people from the subcontinent. There are many people from the US and many other geographies. Lots from Southeast Asia, Japan, many other places. So we really do have a very diverse community here as well. But we also face many of the similar challenges in relation to the things that are happening in the UK. So a lot of the work we do is actually about looking at what's happening in the UK, looking at what's happening in Australia and saying, hey, we're tackling the same issues, whether that's around healthcare, whether that's around infrastructure, defence, pick your sector, almost everything, because we have such similar structures, not the same, but similar structures, there's a lot of crossover of opportunity. So if you have something that sells well in the UK, it may need some tweaking, but there's a pretty good chance there's a market for it here in Australia. So what is the current relationship? Well, in terms of two-way investment, the UK stock of investment here in Australia currently sits at 737 billion. The two-way investment relationship is 1.3 trillion Aussie dollars. So it's a significant relationship. The UK is our second largest investor in Australia behind the US. And in terms of where we have our investment, we look at the UK behind the US as our second favorite destination to invest in as well. So it's a very strong relationship in that sense. Two-way trade has been increasing over the last decade, currently around 31 billion Aussie dollars or about 15 billion pounds. So there is a lot of trade going on. The UK is our 5th largest trading partner. So a significant partner for Australia. These numbers are a bit antiquated, and I apologise for that, but the numbers were due to be reviewed last year, but due to COVID and the fact that we'd closed our borders for some period of time here in Australia, I've decided to keep the old numbers in. But it gives you a really great idea that, you know, more than 500,000 people each year, generally, in a normal sense, are being visitors in each other's country. So put that on top of the number of residents that are there, there's a pretty good market to work with. So how do I start? How do I get involved in trade? How do I get involved in exports? Look, there's a number of avenues that people take to do this, and there isn't a right answer or a wrong answer on any of these things. So feel free at any time to question my logic or what I say, because quite frankly, there are numerous answers to any of this, really. The first thing I'd say is, before you come, do your homework. Simply, it's really easy to get online and Google. You can change your location on Google. You can go and explore the Australian market from your desktop and see what we've got. And there are plenty of examples of organisations that export to Australia without ever coming to the market. And they do that online using, you know, Facebook and other platforms, Amazon, all of those sorts of things. We also have a dedicated M&S.com.au website. So we can buy directly from M&S in the UK. And it looks and feels at this end like an Australian store. Online store, obviously. The book depository is another one. and indeed books and printed materials, surprisingly enough, are one of the key exports from the UK to Australia. So when you start thinking about what you're going to do, the best thing is to start engaging and embracing our ecosystem. And there is lots that you can do around this. The Department of International Trade in the UK host events on exporting to Australia. We obviously do at the Australian British Chamber, but our sister business in the UK, the Australian UK Chamber of Commerce, also host events about doing business in Australia. And there are opportunities to meet people face to face, which I think is always important. And each state of Australia, as well as Austrade, our federal government body, which is the equivalent of the Department of International Trade, are there in Australia House on the Strand in London, ready and willing to support you to look at the Australian market and see how you can engage with us. So contact the people who are close to you to start with. And then it's about how do we utilize that knowledge within our network and within your own networks that can help you to understand what would it actually take? What do I need to know about customs? What do I need to know about certificates of origin? What do I need to know about taxation law in Australia? Or if this is an export from the UK, do I pay VAT? There are lots of things that people who haven't exported before need some advice on. So ask around. There will inevitably be people in your network that are already doing trade with other countries, whether that's just next door somewhere in Europe or whether that's across the world in Australia. And if you can find somebody who's doing business with Australia, you'll find the interesting thing about companies that have been successful at exporting is they'll tell you about the things that they did well and the things that they won't without too much fuss. People are pretty keen to share their experiences around this, both in the UK and from Australia, and what works and what doesn't. And that's very informal advice, but really useful case studies that can help shape your thinking. Absolutely utilise the support that's on offer. The DIT network across the UK in particular, and they have outreach not just here in Australia, but around the world in many markets. They have people who are well networked, and we work, in fact, just this afternoon, I was with the British Consul General in Sydney, who's also the head of DIT across Australia and New Zealand, talking about strategy for the next 12 months. These people work closely with chambers, they work closely with the industry and have great relationships with governments. So if you're looking at selling anything into a government market, they are a great hand holder and introduction agent in that space, as are we at the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, but utilise us because you can, and we're here to do that. The important thing to do as well before you come is to build what you think your initial hypothesis and your initial thoughts around a go-to-market strategy for Australia. What do you think that might look like? One of the hardest things to do when people come to Australia, and they say, oh, we're looking at setting up, or we're looking at exporting, and they haven't thought about what that would look like for them or what they think that might look like. It's much easier to modify somebody who's already had some thoughts and give them some advice rather than trying to start from scratch when you arrive here. So it's important to build that initial view before you make the jump and hop on the plane. Come visit us. There's nothing better, as I said earlier, than face-to-face opportunities. So once you've got your initial hypothesis, depending on what sector you're in, what you're looking to do, look for opportunities to join a trade delegation visit to Australia. I know there are many that are run not just by us at the Chamber, but by DIT, by the various state governments here in Australia. They bring people over to look at this market. There are lots of opportunities, and it's really about getting to familiarise yourself with the organisations that might be running those. We can certainly help direct you in the right direction around those things. DIT have very specific programs which are really focused on getting you your first client, but we do a lot of work in that space as well, and we work very much hand in glove. So great opportunities to do that. It's really making sure, as I said before, that you come armed with the questions that you need answered. and that you have a hypothesis that you're testing rather than just coming, quite frankly, to watch the rugby in a few weeks, that you're actually trying to deliver, thinking about what you're going to deliver at the end of your trip back to your business and how that will pan out for you going forward. One of the things that you need to be really clear about is in Australia, the vast majority of people in Australia will call a spade a spade. We're not interested in people who want to tell us, oh yeah, we're going to do all this, and then actually I wasn't interested at all. You need to be very frank and upfront, fairly direct with people. You need to ask very direct questions about the particulars of what you need or what you think you need to achieve to achieve your goals, so that people are really clear on that. We're not offended by that. You need to be polite, obviously, but I'm sure you would be, but you need to have that clarity of mind and clarity of thought about what you're trying to do, and be clear with the person you're meeting with on what that looks like. Whilst you're here, build your network. Come and visit us. And one of the things that's really important is somebody who comes and says they want to do everything and then disappears, and we don't see them for a few years or don't see them for a couple of years or a year. That doesn't really build the relationship. For us to, and it's quite frankly, it's the same thing we feel coming to the UK, that if you are serious about the market, if you're serious about the opportunity, if you've turned up and you've got some good feedback, you think that you're going to progress, you need to keep in touch with people. You need to come and visit them again. The repeat visit is really important in building that trust that will underpin your business here in Australia. So what does launching in Australia look like? Well, before you start, think and get the right advice. And I'm not going to tell the people on this call what legal advice you need to take, what accounting advice, tax advice, and other things that you need to take, but I can certainly help people navigate that. And that's part of what we do, is introduce people to the right advisors that can help on that process. It's important, if you're setting up a local entity and having people, you need to have a bit of a kickstart, get people aware of your arrival, and we can happily do that. We've got others that will help in specific industries, looking for speaking spots at industry conferences. I mean, these are all sort of the nuts and bolts of entering any market. And the important thing is recognizing that your USP for the Australian market may not be identical to your USP in Australia. And take, for example, Barclays, who I met with today. They operate here in Australia. They don't do home mortgages. They don't do current accounts for individuals. They only work in capital markets and very specific parts of their global remit. They do not work in a whole bunch of things that people may know them for from the UK. So it's understanding what your particular USP is for the Australian market and making sure you nuance that, because whilst we can talk cricket and rugby and other sports, rivalries, competitions, which beer is better, and so forth, Australia is just a little bit different. So spend that time understanding what those differences might mean at your end. Look for PR and media opportunities, find key partners and build towards your first client. Figure out who you can do a lot of work figuring out who your first client or 10 clients might be, and then use our networks to get in to see those and find your way to start that conversation. Then obviously, once you figure that out, you need to find your first employee, set up an office, and then it's really a matter of growing. And growing is the part that we love the best here at the Chamber. And that's because we've got a network of over 30,000 organisations, both here in Australia and into the UK. The vast majority of them are here. They are both British and Australian companies. Think about your own network and who you do business with in the UK. Not everyone clearly does business in Australia, but a lot of organisations that you may not know are actually doing business in Australia. And it might be, I can't tell you the number of times that I've had the opportunity to introduce somebody to somebody from another firm that they work with they worked with together back in the UK before they came to Australia, didn't know the other firm was here, suddenly went, oh, we do all this stuff with you in the UK. How do we find our alignment here? So make sure you use that network to and think about who you know in the UK who might also be operating here. It's really useful in making those big growing statements and developing your business. We're always happy to help. And the main thing is get out and network. Australia is a really relationally driven market. If you don't have relationships, it's very difficult to move on. Why export or invest overseas at all? It all sounds like so much trouble. Well, the research shows that companies that export have higher revenue, have higher profits, they can pay higher wages, and they're more stable and less susceptible to economic shocks. Not sure that that's always true in a pandemic, but broadly speaking, that is true. And hopefully we've seen the last of pandemics for a little while. So lastly, I just want to touch on what does the UK FTA mean for me? Well, it began negotiation in June 2020. As I said earlier, it was signed on the 17th of December. Hopefully it will come into force by the end of the year. I'm fairly confident of that, but politics is a funny game, and you never say certainly on anything in politics until you've seen it signed and the royal assent given. But the FTA is a publicly available document. It is ginormous. They're what we describe as telephone directories, huge volumes, quite complicated, and you have to go and pick and choose the bits of information that you need to pull it together. I'll talk a little bit about this document in a moment, which is, as you can see, quite a bit slimmer, which is our response and some of our takeaways. But here are some thoughts for you to sort of hopefully stimulate some of the discussion after I finish in a minute or two. So what happens the day that the FTA comes into force? 99% of goods become tariff-free on implementation. There are a number of things that will still exist and may be still hurdles in terms of coming into Australia or indeed for Australian goods coming to the UK. For example, in the last autumn statement, the Chancellor made a comment about changing the way that alcohol would be taxed, and it would be alcohol by volume, and that's really challenging for our wine industry, but it's not part of the free trade agreement. It's a behind the border issue. Similarly, if you're an exporter of cars to Australia, at the moment, there's a 5% tariff on passenger vehicles. That will disappear on day one, but there's still a luxury car tax. So if you're in the higher end of the market, which is basically something over about £40,000 in terms of vehicle sticker price, then you're going to be paying what we call the luxury car tax. Now, we're working to actually get rid of that in the background, but that is another behind the border issue. So it's interesting and important that you understand what those behind the border challenges might be. We also have some pretty strict biosecurity measures here in Australia, so it's important to understand those as well. But particularly given that both the UK and Australian economies are, give or take, roughly 80% services based, the key part about that is IP and people, and the ability to move people between Australia and the UK as internal transfers, intra-company transfers, the ability to recruit people directly from Australia or directly from the UK to an Australian entity will become much, much easier. These are on a temporary basis because that's what is allowed under the WTO framework. But many of those, although not quite ironed out in terms of the finer details, will probably lead to opportunities for permanent residency here in Australia and eventually citizenship. And we're looking for reciprocity around that and working through some of the finer points on that at the moment between the two countries. There's alignment and mutual recognition of some standards. There's a huge amount in the digital trade provisions, everything from where you need to locate data, that becomes much easier. The way businesses can operate, everything from e-signatures, some streamlining of customs protocols, trusted trader provisions. There's a whole range of different pieces around that. And then there's also access to capital. And there's some great examples of UK companies who do large-scale R&D here in Australia across a range of different sectors. And there are some interesting opportunities in terms of funding, government grants and funding for R&D. And if you're bringing an investment here to do that, there are some really great opportunities that governments will support to help your investment. Everything from payroll tax reductions, co-investment from government. There's a whole stack of things that are there to help support you. I've already talked about the non-tariff barriers. I was waving around this document before. I haven't got my screen on, but hopefully you can see it. It's called Delivering Opportunity. It's a very light read, and there are some lovely boxes which give you clues about the things that businesses should be considering. When I send through the slides, you'll be able to click on the link, but you can go to britishchamber.com and have a look at that under the FTA and bilateral research tab on the British Chamber website. All right, I've been powering along for a while, and I'm sure there's plenty of questions, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for being attentive and listening. I appreciate that. And I really hope that we can have a really useful and fruitful discussion.
David, thank you very much indeed for the last sort of half an hour. Really interesting. Especially like the sort of your practical guide, so to speak, or I think I've put 5 steps down from doing your homework through to growing. I very much like that. And I think whether we've got a member this morning who's working already in a company that might be exploring opportunities in Australia, or we've got members in practice who are advising those entrepreneurial, smaller, but companies wanting to grow and looking at international markets. Very useful, very useful. Can I start? Well, one question, which is along the lines of, we read a lot in the British press since Brexit about the government exploring, entering into and signing a number of agreements. Given what you have seen leading up to the signing of the Australian-UK free trade agreement, what do you believe are the key benefits for entrepreneurs and SMEs?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question, and look, I'm not going to prosecute the case for or against Brexit. We are where we are, and so what are we going to do next? And is it easier or harder? I'm not going to entertain that sort of commentary. But what does it mean in terms of a free trade agreement? What do these things unpack for entrepreneurs? Basically, it's how do we get rid of red tape? That is the starting point for a free trade agreement. So part of the process that we started on and embarked on well before the start of the FTA in negotiations in June 2020 was a really comprehensive conversation with industry, with a range of industry bodies, with our members, with businesses both here in Australia but in the UK, and ask them, what are the things that irritate you? It takes so long to get a visa. It's so difficult to get the right people. That was universally one of the biggest problems. We just don't understand how we can access the Australian market. It's so far away that that hasn't changed. We can't change to the distance. How do we actually use Australia as a staging post to get into the rest of Asia? What do these things actually mean? And really, fundamentally when you sort of dig down, there's a whole range of things that have been unlocked because we've decided that instead of being more protectionist than we would like, and given that the UK has left the EU and you have the ability to sign your own free trade agreements, I'd note, without being impolite to our European friends, we started negotiation with the EU well before the UK decided to leave the European Union, and the UK were part of the negotiating group that we were working with. We have a signed free trade agreement between Australia and the UK. We do not have a signed free trade agreement between Australia and the EU. So we've managed to move very quickly to unlock the opportunities for people. whether that's around the movement of people, the data provisions. The digital part of this agreement is fantastic. And when you see what has just been announced in the last couple of days in the UK about the digital agreement with Singapore being cutting edge, a lot of the same provisions that are in that agreement are part of the digital agreement that Australia signed with Singapore a couple of years ago. And that was the fundamental basis of the digital agreement that we have within the FTA. So if you've been following that and you get the context around that, the opportunities, it's not just for tech. Part of it's tech and part of it's around data, part of it's around IP, but a lot of it's actually streamlining things for goods and services that just mean it's not as hard as it used to be. And taking away tariffs on goods for a start is brilliant. I'm looking forward to buying a bottle of Scotch whiskey that's 5% cheaper. I'm looking forward to buying a Jaguar or a Land Rover that's 5% cheaper. I'm looking forward to, I'm not going to buy penguins, but hopefully you'll buy Tim Tams. Don't worry about the Vegemite. I'm happy to eat it. You can stay on the Marmite. But there are loads of things that when you start unpacking it, and it's such a complicated and big document, you need to really focus on the bits that are most important to you. And there's loads of people, and we can happily put you in touch with loads of people who are really across the detail. I've got a stack of people here who've been working with us through the chamber on what does that mean for agricultural firms? What does it mean for food and beverage firms? What does it mean for infrastructure, for automotive, for pick your sector, aerospace, defense? There's loads of opportunities. And because we're such similar markets and we're complementary, we're at the other end of the world, so we can work to each other's time zones. There's stacks. Stacks are really great stuff. And each entrepreneur needs to figure out their own bit, but come and talk to us because we'll happily point you in the right direction. There's so many different opportunities.
No, look, David, thank you for your thoughts there. And I think whether we're talking about trade agreements, free trade agreements, or other business-related matters, if from an entrepreneur and a small business perspective, red tape is being slashed, bureaucracy is being slashed. So, for example, exporting can be done quicker. Maybe there's access to a greater range of intelligence. There's more choice. There's lower prices. Then everybody hopefully benefits.
Yeah, and just some simple things too around that, which is we have equivalence and mutual recognition of standards and other things, which mean if your good is good enough to sell in the UK, largely it will be good enough to sell in Australia. It's not like, we're selling this product in the EU, now we don't have a market for it. Oh, will Australia accept it? Well, most likely, yes, we will. Yeah. As I said earlier, biosecurity, there are a few things that we're a little bit conscious of. But British cheeses are making their way out here, which I'm not sure the French want anymore, for example, just to throw a little piece on a toast.
Well, maybe that does bring us on to another question where, somebody's mentioned, well, David has talked about goods, cars, whiskey, you've just mentioned cheese there. The question is, well, does the free trade agreement include all goods and services, or are there certain restrictions? Have certain goods, services been excluded, or is it everything from ceramics to cars to whiskey to cheese, tech, etc.?
Yep, basically 99% of everything is on the table. I think there's only 3 products we're not allowed to export to the UK. I'm going to forget one of them, but the other 2 are eggs and chickens. Now, I'm not sure that we want to send fresh eggs to the other side of the world. And we know about the UK's fascination with American chlorinated chicken, so we're not too worried about leaving you guys with that either. But it does mean that we still haven't answered which one will come first, the chicken or the egg. But we'll have to wait and see whether we unravel that one in time. Yeah, that's it. There are so few products, I can list them. That's how few. And basically anything which is manufactured, whether it's technology, computer parts, cars. We buy digging equipment, big mining equipment out of JCB are one of our members. They send out their kit to Australia. Plenty of automotive brands. Any goods, basically. There are a few minor exceptions, and really it's mainly focused around that biosecurity piece. Yeah. Basically everything else is a free-for-all, and we're ready to buy. And to your point earlier, this is great for both economies in terms of it gives more customer choice. It makes our markets more competitive. It means that you need to be lean and hungry as a business as well to compete. But we're a pretty high cost production country. So if you're able to export, shipping and freight right now is, we've all heard about the supply chain issues and the increasing costs of freight. It does make it harder right now. But if you're thinking about where you want your business to be in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years from now, you need to start thinking about that now and finding out what are the steps and doing the exploratory work. That's not going to turn around in a couple of days. It's going to take a little bit of time, and you need to spend the time to really go through those things and learn about our market in a way that you have the confidence to turn up and really give it a red hot shake.
Now, understood. Thank you. And again, I think this question has been picked up probably from something you've just said there, but you mentioned it earlier on in your presentation, probably under the initial stage or the Visit Australia stage. So the question is very much around, in the UK, we have gov.uk, good website with a heap of information in across a range of different areas. Yep. Are there links that David could provide or his team could provide around about specific customs information or the sorts of documentation that's going to be vitally important for a client looking to set up in Australia, depending on what it is that their business is involved in? Yeah, absolutely.
And happy to put some of those. I might edit my slides tomorrow morning when I come in and put a few of those links on that for you. But look, the Austrade website is a really useful and valuable tool on that front. It's austrade.gov.au. And that's somewhat like the gov.uk site, only we're still quite fragmented with government departments in different areas. So it's not all in the one site in the clean and tidy way that the UK have. It's one of the things we're trying to encourage the Australian government to do, actually. So there are some good places there. The other thing I'd say is good freight forwarders and shipping lines and those sorts of things generally have some pretty good customs brains lurking around in them. So before you sort of try and confuse yourself with lots of government documentation, go and ask somebody who might have done it before, as I said earlier, or go and talk to a freight. If you're thinking of, well, maybe I can air freight it because it's lightweight or it needs urgent delivery compared to waiting for it to come by ship, those sorts of things. Think about your mode of travel and then find the right partner that can help you with that freight forwarding, and they will generally have a whole range of information that they need to provide in terms of when they're shipping. They need to make sure that documentation is there for them to ship your product anyway. So they're usually a really good source of information, and there's plenty of organisations I can introduce you to on that front as well.
Lovely. All right. Thank you for answering that one. The next question takes us on a couple actually that take us more into the personal arena. And you'd mentioned the ease of being able to travel and work. Can David just clarify? I'd read that the ease for Britons to travel and work in Australia was going to be more prevalent and easier for those under 35. Is this correct? Fairly direct, I suppose, David.
Yeah, no, and I love a direct question. It's much easier to answer a direct question than one that doesn't give you a clear idea. Yeah, the short answer is yes. So one of the things that we've done as part of this arrangement is the traditional 2-year working holiday visa that we've had here in Australia. You could get 12 months. You could extend it to 2 years if you did, I think it was 3 months, work in a regional or rural setting. And that would allow you to extend that to a 2-year visa. There was a lot of complaints from the UK about that, and I think there was a phrase that got bandied around. There was 90 days a slave because you had to go and work on some remote station mustering cattle or something. Yeah, there were some great stories about what people thought it really meant. Actually, it wasn't quite so bad. I've lived in a number of regional towns in Australia in my lifetime, and there are some great places on the coast where you can get up and go surfing every morning and still be in the office by 9. And it's quite an enjoyable place. Bigger cities, it's a bit more expensive to live near the coast if you want to go and live in Bondi and go to Bondi Beach or Manly or other places that people might talk about. But anyway, leaving that aside, the answer is yes. What we have agreed is that in both directions, there'll be a 3-year visa that will apply to people who are under the age of 35 as a working holiday visa. There are also provisions around graduates and around a number of sectors in professional services and other skills that are on Australia's wanted list, if you like, that have been enshrined in this FTA, which mean, for example, if as an Australian engineering firm or a British engineering firm operating here in Australia, an Arup or a Mott MacDonald or one of those, if they want to employ somebody from the UK who's not currently an employee of theirs over there, they can now advertise here in Australia and in the UK at the same time. We used to have a market protection mechanism where you had to check the local market, prove that you couldn't find somebody locally, and then you're allowed to do your global search. As of the time that the FTA comes into force, in certain sectors, that won't apply. So there's a load of different professional services, but there are a bunch of other jobs too, skilled jobs. Underwater welders, I think, is on the list. If you're somebody who's worked in the North Sea and you want to change to work off the Pilbara, in the northwest or in the Bass Strait, there are going to be great opportunities. We're only just starting our offshore wind business in Australia now, so if you're in that sector, there's plenty of opportunities there. So there'll be lots of great opportunities, and it will become much easier to get work here in Australia and to change from one place to the other. With a sponsored program, but nonetheless much easier than it is currently.
Okay. Thank you for that, David. And I think in a way that links nicely to another question that I've had. Somebody has read that, again, there is I think you've mentioned this, there's going to be an increased opportunity for UK professionals. And somebody's obviously read, can David clarify, a UK lawyer would not have to re-qualify, is that correct? But when we're talking about professions or professionals, the question is asked, are we talking lawyers, doctors, accountants, obviously from this sort of webinar perspective, engineers, etc.?
Yeah, so engineers, it's pretty straightforward, I understand already. The biggest challenges, and this is one of these issues around what the government can do and what industry has to do for itself. So particularly lawyers, I've always found it crazy that we've made each other do extra qualifications to re-qualify and recertify in each other's countries. To be honest and quite frank about it, it's because not because of government, it's because of the professional bodies that you must belong to practice. So, for example, if you're a surgeon, you need to be a fellow or a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, and they dictate what the qualification process is. They dictate what standard you have to have met and what qualifications you've got and whether they're transferable completely or not. I've always found that completely hilarious because all four of my grandparents were doctors, and all of them trained in the UK. And when they came back to Australia as obstetrician, gynecologists and radiologists and others, when they came back, they set up the Royal College of Obstetricians, Gynecologists and the Royal College of Radiologists here in Australia on the same basis as the one in the UK set up, and then decided, but we're not going to necessarily in the future recognise their qualifications now that we are providing those at our own universities. So there's this, I won't say it's a cartel, but it's not about government getting in the way on that case. It's much more about the individual professional bodies making that step. Now, the legal profession in particular has worked really closely with the negotiators to try and make that as seamless as possible. Right. To be honest, I won't try and pretend that I know every finer detail. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure a lawyer will go and read the FTA in that particular part to make sure that they know exactly what they're talking about. So rather than try and give a lawyer legal advice, I'll suggest to them definitely go and have a look at the FTA. There is some provisions there, and what the framework of the FTA has done has made it much easier for those professional bodies to say to each other, where are the differences? How do we minimise that level of red tape again? So, you know, you've spent 5 years studying law in the UK or in Australia, and you've practiced for 20 years. You probably know things pretty well. We're a common law market. There are some parts, I wouldn't want you arguing constitutional law necessarily. We actually have a constitution, you don't. So some of these things do have a little bit of difference. But broadly speaking, the idea is that we get to as similar a platform as possible and make it as easy as possible for people to bridge whatever gaps they might need to.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you, David. Unless there are any other questions coming through, I think that probably, you know, brings us sort of quite nicely to the end of this morning's session. And I'll repeat again, very grateful, David, because it's evening your time. So thank you. You know, I think this sort of webinar for our members is vitally important, because you read, you see a lot of news around government activity after Brexit. And I think from an accounting perspective, whether you are the accountant within a business or you are advising businesses as a practitioner, you're not the expert in any of these areas, but you do need to have some form of knowledge, and you need to say to a client or senior management within a business, this is where I think we should be going, this is who we should be talking to. So, David, the session really informative, really useful. Thank you on behalf of all of those who've attended this morning. I will share within the next 24, 48 hours the slides that you've gone through. And I will also share the contact details for your colleagues, your team, because I would strongly advise anybody who's wanting to know more or thinking about options to make contact with the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. But as I said, you know, the practical guidance, the 5 steps, as I think I called it, very useful. Thank you very much indeed. And I can see a number of people are already posting, you know, thank you for the session, David. So on behalf of the Institute, many thanks for your time. I know you're extremely busy. I'll extend an invitation to you now. You know, when you're next in the UK, do let me know. Would be more than happy to welcome you here at the Institute in London. So just we'll keep in touch. Thank you to everybody who's attended. And yeah, David, a final word from you before I say cheerio to everybody.
Well, look, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some insights. I think there are huge opportunities in the Australian market for British businesses, and everywhere I turn, I see more and more opportunities popping up. There are great opportunities in a whole range of sectors that the UK is excellent at for people to come and do things here. Whether that's a small SME business in fintech, in health, and it doesn't matter what the market is. As I say, huge opportunities here. We'd love to hear from you. We're happy to hold your hand on this journey. And importantly, to the point made earlier, we can help you find the people who will provide you the professional advice that you need to make sure that you're ticking the right boxes on this journey. And you'll be here enjoying the cool of the Sydney winter before you know it.
David, thank you once again. Have a good evening at your end. To everybody here in the UK, have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the sunshine. And look, everybody, take care. See you all soon. Thanks, David. Cheers.
Thanks, Jonathan. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye all.